Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is a slight break from the Know Your Foe series, and we're going to be discussing some of the Necron rules and abilities within the Codex and how they could be improved, as we seem to be slipping down the slippery slope in terms of competitive play. So today I'm going to go through 50 changes that in an ideal world could happen to our Necron Codex. So the Necrons still have some great synergy and a lot of cool tricks and gimmicks, but when it comes to winning in a serious matchup, we just don't have the options. So before diving into the video, let's get today's shout out dealt with, which is going to go for M. Luch for his comment made on our previous video with the Know Your Foe series. So shout out to you. And also guys, apologies if I sound a bit nasally today, hay fever is just getting to me at the moment. So to the trusty Necron Codex, and I've got it out in front of me. I'm going to be going through and picking out anything that I think could be changed to make the Necron faction a bit more potent in the 40k game. So they're not going to be in any order of importance, it's just simply in order of the pages within the Codex. Also a little disclaimer guys, this is merely a what if type of video. The aim is a little bit of light-hearted wishful thinking, and at the same time slightly venting out because of how much our Codex has fallen. So skipping the Crusade stuff, as I currently don't touch the Crusade stuff and it would be foolish of me to be putting out any opinion on the Crusade rules when I've barely touched it. So on to the first one, which is the detachment abilities to begin. In particular, the bottom part of the page, which is the Dynastic Agents and Star Gods section. I'm okay with most of that, but the restriction on a single Catan per detachment is a bit weird in my opinion. Now they're not Lord of War models, I mean I personally would just make them Lord of War units. Now the restriction isn't the biggest deal, as you can of course take multiple detachments, so it's just the first thing I've seen here. So next we've got the Dynasty codes. As a whole I quite like the majority of the codes that we have in place. The Mefrit code is pretty clean, although I'd probably add the pistols in there for the extra 3-inch range. It doesn't really make that much of a difference really to add pistols, but they seem to have gone out of their way to not allow that. Off the top of my head there's not that many pistols in there. The Hexmark Destroyer, the Wraiths, Cryptothralls, just to name a few. So yeah, I'd add the pistols there. Next you've got the Nefrit code, which I think stinks. At the very least, let us be able to fire assault weapons at a -1 to hit while using the auto 6-inch advanced beam. That's not really a big ask. Okay, it would mean that those Ghost Reaper warriors could get through models and still fire on a 3+ with the My Will Be Done ability, but can you imagine trying to get 20 warriors not only go through enemy models but to be placed in a spot where they're an inch away from enemy models? It wouldn't happen as easily as you think it would be, so I don't think it would be that overpowered. The Nihilak Dynasty next. I like the first part of the code, an army-wide objective secured, it's pretty good, so take that Dark Angels. But the second part of the code, turning -1 AP weapons into 0 AP weapons in your own deployment zone, isn't that great. I'd rather just have a cover save or remaining stationary perhaps, and not restrict it to our own deployment either. Next, the Zeraken code. I think it works okay. Now the 5+ Phono pain save against mortal wounds is a bit of a weird one, but I'm sure it does come up a fair bit. I would prefer to just seen the code have something else in place of that one though. Maybe a single reroll to the hit rolls to go with that reroll to the wound roll. A bit like Orcs with the Death Skulls clan with those lucky dice. Could also get a reroll to the damage too perhaps. And the Saltec code, I think the rapid fire range needs to be full range for infantry models and not just 18 inches, as the pitiless hunters in the custom codes is just a better option in general, and Saltec tend to be troop heavy anyway, so I think that would slightly improve the code. As for the actual custom codes, we did a custom dynasties video recently. There's some great ones in there, also a few stinkers. Like, did we really need the warrior nobles in there? I don't have a huge issue with the codes as a whole, to be honest. I like to have seen a few of those poor choices get a better look at. Also, why are there only 7 Circumstances of the Awakening options when there's 12 Dynastic Traditions? Well, 11 if you take away the Vassal Kingdom, I guess. And a couple of those 7 options are duds anyway. So I'd like to have seen more options there. Maybe a Destroyer specific option, as there's barely anything in there for Destroyers in the Codex. Number 8, we've got the Stratagems. Now I've got a beef with Stratagems in general, not just the Codex, but the entirety of the 40k game. They divided the Stratagems up into topics such as the battle tactics, epic deeds, requisition stratagems, etc. I don't think this was the best choice. They simply just had to divide them up into phases. Like for example, you can have all the stratagems that could be used in the movement phase in green, obviously at the start. In the shooting phase they could have been in another colour, so blue. I feel like in the heat of battle I sometimes find myself looking at the stratagems that I could use and getting a little bit overflustered, and then I get anxious because I'm taking too long finding something I need. Now I do know every stratagem, but in the game I tend to go blank, so that's just me. I'm sure I'm not alone there, and it would just be so much easier for players, especially new players, if they were organised much better. Now the Necron stratagems are not bad I guess. Some of them are a bit weird, such as the Techno or Oracular Targeting, only working for a single roll. Okay, putting it on something like an Entropic Lance could be good, but I'm rarely using it. There's also a few stinkers in there, but overall they're okay. Maybe the Canoptic units deserve another one in there. For example, maybe the Canoptic Spider could be creating more scarabs or something like that. As for the Dynastic stratagems, could the translocation crypt stratagem include vehicles and monsters? What are we really gaining if we could? We're not exactly going to be teleporting Doomstalkers, are we? And we could just put a vehicle into strategic reserves for a command point anyway, so it seems a little bit odd that they've excluded them. Now this next one might come out a bit weird, but do you guys ever look at the Mefrit stratagem and the Sautek stratagem and just think, shouldn't these stratagems be the other way around? The reason I say this, getting a +1 to hit with a troop heavy Sautek list that are already likely to have the Mind Will Be Done ability put on them, so they're already hitting on 2s. Is it really worth it having that in there? Whereas if you switch the 2 stratagems around, I think it would just complement both the dynasties much better. On to some Kryptek Arcana next, so this one's a gold mine for things that I'd like to see changed. Firstly, everything in there is just too pricey. Some of these things cost half the amount of the actual Kryptek models themselves. Now the Atta Vindicator is effectively a smite, but you're paying 25 points for it and it's restricted to a Psychomancer only. So that's 95 points, which is more than a Marine Librarian who has a better weapon, more attacks, a better armor save, and has 2 powers to go on top of that, and a Deny the Witch as well. Now obviously we don't have Psychers, but the Arcana is, like I mentioned, pretty much an alternative to Smite. The counter-temporal nanomines is a whopping 30 points, which allows a Chronomancer to do a Psychomancer job better than a Psychomancer does, due to it now being an 18-inch range, not a 12-inch range, and he doesn't need to roll against any leadership for it. So could there not have just been an Arcana for the Psychomancer to double his range for the Harbinger of Despair ability? Maybe. Methalodermal Tesla Wave. Again, it feels like another little bit of a smite attack here, more of a mini smite, as it's only 6-inch range with a D3 mortal wounds, but it's still 20 points though. Surely this is more like 5 or 10 tops. Now Incursors from the Space Marine Codex have something very similar with the Haywire Mines, and they do D3 mortals on a 2+ roll, and that's only 10 points. Now it is only once per battle, but how often are you actually going to be within 6 inches of a unit that's charging you in battle? Not as often as you'd think. The Prismatic Obfuscation Arcana, which means the Kryptek cannot be targeted unless he's the closest model. This is costing you 20 points, yet for 40 points you can get Cryptothralls, and that's 2 of them. And they've got the ability included there, so not only that, they're extremely good. They've got some decent attacks in melee and at range with their pistols. Then even if you didn't take either of those options, it's only snipers that can target them, avoiding the Lookout Sir ability. So I think a lot of these Arcanas just need a points reduction. Next, moving on to page 65 in the Codex, we've got the Warlord traits. Now we do suffer quite slightly here, as most are not the best. Some good ones, some not so great. I'm not sure which I'd remove, to be honest, and what to replace them with, but when I look at other books and other codexes such as Blood Angels in their supplement, I'm seeing the Artisan of War trait, which is a straight up 5+ Feel No Pain save if you select the Adamantium Mantle, or a 2+ armor save with a 5+ Invulnerable save with the Artificer armor. Obviously no good for Overlords, that one, but imagine a Necron Lord as your Warlord having something like that. In fact, here's one from their book, the Soul Warden. It's an aura which grants all Blood Angel units within 6 inches a 5+ Feel No Pain save against mortal wounds. Now with our Necron Codex we've got Immortal Pride, and only the Warlord is getting that 5+ Feel No Pain save against mortal wounds, so there's clearly a difference there. Next, as Dynastic Warlord traits go, the Mefrit code kind of annoys me slightly. It's clearly a melee based trait when the Mefrit code is a shooter based dynasty, so this one feels more like a Novak Dynastic trait if I'm honest. In fact, I'll probably change the Novak trait for this one, as their trait kind of sucks anyway, rolling a 6 to wound when you don't have that many attacks to begin with. Maybe you roll a single 6 to wound. I'd rather have a Strength 8 Warscythe, thank you. Relics next. To be honest, I like our relics. Now the Nefric relic is a waste of time though. Surely this thing could have just been a more simpler -1 to hit with that blind ability rather than preventing Overwatch. Now Overwatch itself is quite uncommon anyway, so a -1 to hit would have been much better. The Sautek relic is also something I've never really had the desire to use, being a Sautek player. The dynasty is predominantly a shooty dynasty, and they like to do things at range, so why give us a relic that prevents enemy units fighting first in melee? Is it going to really make much difference in a fight? Are our warriors just going to butt them at the bottom of their Ghost Reapers? Because they don't have any melee weapons. I'd rather see the Bearer allow core units within 6 inches to shoot rapid fire at full range or something along those lines. As already mentioned, Pitiless Hunters just seems to be a better option than having the Sautek code. Next you've got the secondary objectives page. They seem to think our nobles are like gods. Code of combat is never going to get selected, ever. Nobles killing units isn't really a major thing. You'll be lucky to get 1 unit killed for the single 3 points from it. There's just better options in the main rulebook, so I wouldn't ever go for that one. Then we get onto reanimation protocols. Now, do I miss the good old days of a 5+ reanimation that happens to every dead model at the start of your turn? Yes, I do. Was it overpowered? Again, probably a yes there. It was basically a resurrection orb army wide every turn for every unit, and you only needed a single 5+ roll to get a destroyer model back, so it's quite crazy. Now the current reanimation protocols mechanic works to a certain extent. It of course doesn't really give you much benefits to multi-wound models such as destroyer models with 3 wounds. So I'd like to see it more of a 50-50 roll at all times, but done at the end of a phase to give your opponent time to focus fire on the unit, otherwise it would just be majorly broken. I think this would put us back in a more comfortable position in the grand scheme of things while not being too overpowered. If anything, you could argue this is a nerf to our reanimation protocols because we currently get it after each enemy attack, which could be considered more valuable, but those multi-wound models don't really get any value whatsoever at present. Then we get on to the command protocols. Where do I start with this one? Some people think this is great, others not so much. I'm in the camp that doesn't really like them at all. And the issue I've got with command protocols is that you've got to set them up in turn order before the game even begins. Now some of the protocols are quite straightforward, such as the protocol of Hungry Void. Wouldn't be used in turn 1 as it's a melee protocol, so you're extremely unlikely to be in combat turn 1, especially if you go first. And that's a 50-50 as you need to declare the order of the protocols before you even know who goes first. To add to this, you need a noble to not only be your warlord, but it needs to be on the tabletop at the start of the battle round. And then on top of that, you need to be within 6 inches of any character model just to gain any benefits. So there's so many factors of this ability that suck, if I'm honest. So Space Marines, just as an alternative to discuss, they don't have these kind of restrictions. And not only that, it's much clearer and it works hand in hand with how the game progresses. For example, having the Devastator Doctrine in turn 1, as you're likely going to be firing and not charging in turn 1, so the -1 AP to heavy weapons just makes sense. Now I think for Necrons, we shouldn't require a noble model as a warlord, and shouldn't need one on the table to activate the protocols. Not all lists will even include a noble. Then being within 6 inches of a character is also kind of weird, as a Hexmark Destroyer is a character, yet they don't really have the same authority as the HQ characters. I think maybe moving it to HQs only would have been more accepted, which of course is actually a nerf to us. Or alternatively to that, maybe we can select a unit anywhere on the board to be buffed each battle round, rather than requiring characters and being within 6 inches of them. It could be one unit, maybe it could be D3, I don't know. It just feels a little bit off to me. It could have been just much more simpler and less restricted. All the directives are just very so-so, and they don't have a massive impact, and getting them to work at the right time is another problem entirely. Then we come on to the actual datasheets. So the first one I'm going to pick out here is Orican the Diviner. They just need to rework his Stars of Right ability. Hulking up at the very least should be a D6 roll equal to or less than the turn number. Making it only less than the turn number means that even in turn 5 you've only got a 50% chance of getting it. Okay, you do have a minimal chance of having it in previous rounds, but it's just very unlikely. Vargado Baron, I'd like to have seen him have some sort of Fear No Pain save. He looks like a bit of a beast. He just seems to be a bit flimsy for 100 points. If I wanted a Lord, I'd personally just rather take a generic Necron Lord with a Resurrection Orb at the same cost. At least I can also put a Relic on him too. Illuminazares is a tricky one, neither a Noble or a Destroyer, and he's also named, so you can't select his own Warlord trait, you can't put a Relic on him or a Resurrection Orb. I think he needs a slight points reduction to see play. I'd be more comfortable if he was at the 140 mark, and he really needs an in-run save as well. Also, surely this is a monster, not an infantry model. The size of him and the stats would suggest that. Then at least he could shoot that lance into combat. The ability held by Nemesis Zandrek I'm not a super fan of, which is the Transient Madness. 2 out of 3 of those buffs to the core units are melee based buffs, and like we mentioned earlier, the South Dynasty is a shooty dynasty, so it doesn't quite sit well with me. Then another named character, which is Trezan, with his ability the Surrogate Host, which I think could be improved, as you literally have to remove another character from the battle and destroy him in order to keep Trezan up and running. It is optional, but could this not have just been any model rather than a character? I'd rather not remove my Necron Lord with an orb, thank you. Royal Wardens I do love. I would like to have seen a teeny tiny point reduction on him. Apart from his adaptive strategy ability, he's a single model carrying a decent range weapon. I think he's more of a 65 point model for me, but not the biggest problem though. Next we've got the Scorpec Lord, who was the poster boy of the 9th edition. I think he's not that bad, but I would give him a wound or 2 more for the points cost. He's got a lot of similarities to a Marine Dreadnought model in a way, even a Demon Prince from the Chaos factions. Now Living Metal does factor in I guess, but it's not the biggest change really. But for that amount of points, give him a few more wounds. The Locust Lord is another one in a weird place. Now he's a Destroyer Lord with an orb, and the orb cannot be taken alongside the Phylactery, which is a little bit annoying. I do find it weird that he's got access to a Resurrection Orb, because he's only able to buff Destroyer Cult units, so could this be an opportunity to aid Destroyer Cult units with reanimation perhaps, as those models are very tough to reanimate. Next you've got the Psychomancers, especially with the Harbinger of Despair ability. You just need a better range. It's currently 12-inch range, it's not good enough. It needs to be at least 18-inch range, or just reduce its cost to about 50 points. Canoptic Reanimator, now I'm expecting comments about this one. It's now 80 points, so it's been reduced in price. It needs a further reduction to maybe 60 points. But to begin with, the Nano Scarab Beam needs to be an aura ability. Bin the stratagem off because that's just stupid anyway for 2 command points. It's virtually an aura anyway, but for one single unit to stay within range of it. Also, give this thing a longer range weapon. It fires a 12-inch range and it's pretty worthless. Give it at least 18 inches and 2 damage. Now it's only got 3 shots and it hits on 4s as well, so it's not a big ask. Then we move on to Hexmark Destroyers. Now these guys don't really warrant the character keyword in my opinion. Instead, I'd allow them to go in units of up to 6 like the other Destroyer cult units. I'd also drop them down to 50 points a model, or just drop their wounds down to 3 per model, and then make them 35 points to match the other Destroyer cult units. Now admittedly, that could actually make these guys really good, maybe a bit too good, but now I'm thinking of units such as Aggressors from the Space Marine Codex. They're 40 points and they've got so much DACA, so would they be much different from them? Moving on, we've got the Death Marks. I think they need a points reduction. A 10-man unit is 180 points. They rarely make their points back, although they do snipe a key character off the board, but not anything near 180 points worth. I think a slight reduction to maybe 16 or 17 points per man instead of 18, and maybe put the AP to -3 AP, just a small tweak there. Fade ones are next. They just need a better AP. -2 AP for me is more acceptable. They're the same price as Warriors. Warriors have access to the Gorse Reapers that are not only AP -2, but they're also strength 5. And they've got much better synergy in the Codex than the Flayed ones do. So again, not too much of a big ask giving them -2 AP. Next we've got the Triox Stalker, a really cool model. A bit of a one-trick pony though with his targeting relay. It's a shame that this thing's only strength 7 in melee. Probably should be a strength 8 at the very least, just so that it can fight other melee vehicles. Onto the Catan Shards. The Deceiver needs a slight drop in points in my opinion. He does have a great ability, but he isn't on the same levels as the Nightbringer or the Void Dragon, so I'd drop him down to about 330. The Nightbringer, now he was fine at 350, but they put him up to 370. I'd bring that back down. The Void Dragon is arguably better once you use that stratagem to ignore invuln saves, and he's got a ranged attack too, as well as the extra tail attacks and a 3+ armor save on top of that. So why they only put the Nightbringer up, I'm not sure. Annihilation Barges, another tricky one to fix here. Maybe the Gorse Cannons could be a flat 2 damage, just so you know where you stand with the damage as opposed to D3 perhaps. Or could they have more shots with that cannon? 3 doesn't quite feel enough for a heavy support option. As for the Tesla side of things, I'm not keen on Tesla as the AP is frustrating. Would I change it if I could? Probably not, as I'm aware it's more of a numbers game with Tesla. So the Doomsday Arc, so many things need fixing here. The amount of shots being D6 is just bad. It does have the blast ability, but a lot of the time you're firing this at other vehicles, so blast doesn't really get involved. Don't really know how to fix this to be honest. Maybe a flat 3 shots, I'm not really sure. The damage definitely needs a fix though, as it could just be a D3 plus 3 damage like the Doom Scythe. Or we could see some sort of mechanic that allows for the damage roll to be 2 dice and pick the highest. They probably wouldn't go for that, but it's an option. Next we've got the Locust Destroyers. Thankfully they've had a reduction in their points cost to 50 points for the normal ones and 60 for the heavy variants. Now the D3 damage, I'd move it to a flat 2 with the Gorse Cannons. There's nothing worse than wounding and then rolling a 1 for the damage. The Exterminated Weapon probably needs a buff, just an extra AP perhaps, because without that extra AP it just kinda sucks. The Doomstalkers, I'd apply the same sort of changes as we mentioned with the Doomsday Arc, with the amount of shots and the amount of damage. Fix those 2 things and then we've got a pretty decent heavy support. And to add to this, is this thing meant to be a monster? Just seems a bit weird. Moving on to the Ghost Arcs. Now please just let 20 warriors go in these things. I know the model shows 10, but 20 is where they flourish. And this would make the Ghost Arc a real powerhouse unit in competitive gaming. Every other faction has some sort of transport that fits the unit sizes perfectly. We only seem to have the Flyer as our real option. Speaking of Flyers, the Doom Scythes would be pretty nice if they had quantum shielding. At least their damage and the amount of shots they have has been done properly though. The Night Scythe, which is the other Flyer, they're a tad overpriced for me. What they can do for you is great, but other factions have flyers and transports that not only drop your guys in, but also have a really good solid amount of DACA coming out of it. So either fix the Tesla Destructor or reduce the cost. I'd probably knock it to 100 to 120 points. Now onto the super heavy Lord of War models. The Obelisk, a massive points reduction is needed. I'd knock it 100 points off the actual cost of this thing, just to give it any chance of being used. The Tesseract Bolt, another pricey model. It's just an everlasting Catan with 30 wounds. Maybe it could be 400 points. Now the issue is the standard Catans in the elite section are so highly priced that they've got no choice but to push the vaults up further. The thing is though, these vaults don't have the melee capabilities, and for most of the game they'll have a Catan power or 2 more than the actual normal Catans. The Monolith is next. This one needs to be brought back to the heavy support options in my opinion. I want to be fielding this every game, but it just isn't worth it at the moment. Reduce the points cost to 320 points and give it the fly keyword back. The movement for this thing right now is horrid. The last unit I wanted to discuss is the Covenants of the Dominion Fort. I rarely see these things, and a lot of the time I even forget that this is even an option in our codex. Drop the fort to 90 points, that's 30 points a model. They don't do an awful lot, so they need to be a little bit cheaper. So that's my 50 changes I personally think would make the Codex a more competitive book without going over the top. Now I doubt many of these changes will ever take place. The video is more of a what if kind of video, a little bit of fun. Who knows, maybe Games Workshop will take some ideas from it. So get down in the comments below any changes you'd like to see. They can be minimal, they can be over the top. And as always, comment at random, will be getting a shout out in the next video. So guys, like the video on your exits, sub if you are new, and thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.